Time for another Patreon question. This one comes from Chris, and he asks, what would you do if there was a second video game crash? So what Chris is referring to there is that back in 1983, North America experienced a massive video game crash. To give you an idea, within a span of about a year, sales of video games were down literally 97%. That is kind of mind-blowing to think about today, that out of 100 gamers, only 3 of them were buying games in 1983. Now, that's not the entire picture, and certainly the rest of the world didn't experience that, but it was a big deal here in North America. And so he's wondering, okay, well, what would happen? What would I do if that happened again? Well, first of all, I think it's important to know why that crash happened. And at the time, I was 12 years old, and I was a gamer. I had an Atari 2600, and I do remember going to arcades and playing arcade games and being blown away by essentially the games that you saw there, the technology on display, the graphics, the sounds, the experiences that you got in arcades. And over time, right around 1983, the Atari 2600 was just not able to keep up to it. I remember vividly playing a game like, a game that I remember playing is like Kangaroo. It's sort of like a Donkey Kong clone. And then going home, saving up all my money to buy the Atari 2600 version and bringing it home and being completely disappointed. Now, it's not the programmer's fault. It's because the Atari was so simple, so basic, and it was really becoming long in the tooth. But despite of that, there were so many shovelware titles being released for that system. It was, man, people complain about the Wii. They have no idea. The Atari 2600 was the worst. Especially when you consider that a lot of those games were sold by the boxes on the cover art. And so a lot of times you could make your decision based on either you knew about the game in arcades or you saw this awesome cover art and you'd get the game home and you'd be so disappointed, you know. Now, that's not to say that the ColecoVision wasn't out, and also the Intellivision. Those were certainly better consoles, but in general, there was just way too many lame video games. A lot of people blame the ET release, and that's certainly a part of it, but I personally remember that Pac-Man was a huge disappointment as well. Again, no slight on the developer, it's just simply the limitations of the hardware at that time. And again, me as a kid, I didn't care. I was just like, ah, man, these games are starting to suck, you know? Now, to be fair, what happened was that I left video games, dialed it back a little bit, and then I moved on to the Commodore 64. Somebody showed me a Commodore and I was blown away. It's like all of a sudden the games were arcade quality plus. You got really deep RPGs, you got graphical text adventures, you got so much great stuff. And so to be fair, I didn't really remember or experience the crash at the time. You know, PCs were coming on the scene and really taking over. The Atari ST, the Amiga, MS-DOS machines, the Apple II, things like that. That's where the games were. That's where all the innovation was. And then, of course, the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, soft launched, I believe, in '85, but it really hit its stride in '87. And then the video game industry was right back. So I don't necessarily think that a new crash is coming. Also, too, it's important to know that in 1983, video games by adults and retailers were kind of looked upon as toys. It was a fad, it was something new, you know? And so when the crash came, I think a lot of retailers were like, well, okay, well, video games was a thing, let's move on to the next thing that kids are crazy about. And you know, that's the reason why the NES looks the way it does in North America, because Nintendo needed to sell something that looked like an appliance and not necessarily like a toy. Very important, because today, of course, we don't have that issue. Games are everywhere. Games are bigger than they've ever been. Also, too, games, I feel, are starting to tell a better story. I mentioned the cover art that would be on Atari 2600 games. I love that stuff. But that's where the majority of the story was told, or maybe in the manual. Nowadays, and you guys know this, video games tell amazing stories. Stories you could never tell, like say in a movie. They're starting to catch up to novels in their complexity. because of the amount of time you can invest in them. And also just the characters, the writing, the voice acting, the graphics, you know, they're just so much more than they were back in 1983. And as being someone who has lived through all that, I think, you know, a lot of people look at games today and they're like, oh, they suck today. No, they're better than they've ever been. Also, think about this. If someone was to come to you and say, hey, you have to choose between video games and movies for the rest of your life, like they hold a gun to your head. You have to choose. You only get one, video games or movies. Which one are you going to choose? I think most of us would probably choose video games. Same thing with novels. I think many of us, myself sadly included, I spend way more time playing video games and immersing myself in those stories than I do in novels, especially back, you know, I used to read a lot, you know, back in high school. Now I barely do. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's true. And television, it'd be the same answer. Music, a little tougher for me. It's 50-50 for me if I would choose video games over music, but you know, there is amazing music in video games, so I probably again would choose video games, which goes a long way to illustrate that a second crash would be very unusual, I think, in an art form that is so well established and so far along as video games. However, I know I've blathered on long enough. Let me answer your question. So what would I do if there was a video game crash? Well, like many of you, I suspect, you have a massive backlog of 30 or 40 years worth of games to play. It's a good problem to have. There are so many games out there that either I don't have the time to play, or I haven't finished, or it's in my backlog. That's exactly what I would do. If games stopped today, I'd still enjoy them. I'd still play them. I mean, there's plenty to dig into. So I'd love to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Is a second video game crash coming? And what would you do if there was one? All right, man, great question. This question was asked by one of my Patreon contributors who help support my YouTube channel and help shape the content of my videos. In addition to asking questions like this, they also get access to a private chat, an audio podcast, and early access to most of my Friday videos. You can also set the amount you want to contribute, and you can leave or change it at any time. If you'd like to help support my videos and become part of the Metal Militia, please go to patreon.com/MetalJesusRocks.